Zach Millison woke up groggy, his head pounding like he'd gone 12 rounds with a jackhammer. The last thing he remembered was stepping out of his favorite burger joint, mindlessly scrolling through his phone. Then a sudden flash of light. And now, nothing but disorientation. He was strapped to a sleek, padded table in what looked like a high-tech laboratory. Overhead, soft white lights pulsed in a steady rhythm, casting an eerie glow against metallic silver walls. Strange humming machines surrounded him, some hovering in midair, others clicking and beeping as if engaged in a silent conversation about him in a language he didn't understand. And then there was her. Zach blinked hard. Standing over him was the most breathtakingly alien woman he had ever seen. Mostly because, well, she was the first alien woman he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered like polished silver, smooth and flawless, as if sculpted from liquid metal. Her inky black hair, sleek and neatly tied back, framed the sharp elegance of her face. But it was her eyes, deep violet, glowing faintly, that held him captive, studying him with unsettling curiosity. Her hands hovered just above his bare chest, delicate yet unnervingly precise. "I see you are awake," she said, her voice calm yet clinical, as though addressing a test subject rather than a person. "Yeah," Zach muttered, his throat dry, and tied down. "Not exactly the warm welcome I was hoping for." The alien woman tilted her head, intrigued rather than apologetic. "Restraints are necessary. Your species exhibits unpredictable physical responses under stress. I require stillness for accurate data collection." "Right. Data collection." Zach shifted slightly, testing the restraints. They held firm, snug but not painful. His shirt was gone, leaving his torso exposed. The situation should have been terrifying, but her expression wasn't cruel. If anything, she looked fascinated. She leaned closer, one cool hand tracing along his collarbone. Zach shivered. "Muscle density is remarkable," she murmured, almost to herself. "Fascinating structural composition." Her fingers brushed lightly over his chest, then down the ridges of his abdomen, her touch lingering. "Astonishing texture. Your epidermal ridges exhibit heightened responsiveness to external stimuli." Zach exhaled, suppressing a laugh. "Lady, I don't know what kind of research you're running here, but in human culture, touching like that usually comes after dinner." She paused, blinking. "Is that a requirement?" He snorted. "Not a requirement, just wait, what? Who are you exactly?" The alien woman straightened, folding her hands in front of her, though her gaze remained locked onto him with almost unsettling focus. "I am Dr. Valara Rin, leading xenobiologist of the Vasari Science Council. My mission is to study lesser-known species and their biological functions. You, Zach Millison, are a most intriguing subject." "Uh-huh." Zach swallowed as her fingers trailed along his shoulder, tracing the curve of his bicep. "So, Valara, when you say study..." She met his gaze, utterly serious. "Full physiological analysis, comparative biology, sensory mapping, potential reproductive compatibility." Zach coughed. "Reproductive compatibility? Wow, you don't waste time, do you?" Valara tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Your heart rate is increasing. Are you experiencing distress?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that I've been abducted by a gorgeous silver-skinned scientist who won't stop feeling me up in the name of science." Valara's fingers stilled. "You find my methods arousing?" Zach groaned. "Okay, that's not what I said." "Interesting." She leaned in again, her breath ghosting against his neck as she examined him closely. "Your species' tactile response is more pronounced than expected." Zach squeezed his eyes shut. "This isn't happening. This is a dream, a weird sci-fi fever dream." Valara, meanwhile, continued her study, pressing her fingertips against his chest with clear concentration. Your body language suggests you are both frustrated and intrigued. Are these common conflicting emotions in human males? Zack let out a ragged sigh. Valara, if you don't want me to die of sheer embarrassment, maybe ease up on the touching. She pulled back slightly, looking contemplative. Noted. But her gaze lingered, and Zack swore he saw something in her expression, a flicker of curiosity that went beyond scientific interest. For the first time, it struck Zack that maybe, just maybe, Valara wasn't as detached from all this as she pretended to be. "Very well," she said at last, stepping back. "We will proceed with the examination in a controlled manner. However, I must document all physiological responses thoroughly." Zack groaned, already dreading what that might entail. One thing was for sure. This was shaping up to be the weirdest, most frustratingly hot abduction in human history. Zack had been in some bizarre situations before, like the time he woke up in a stranger's bathtub after an ill-advised Vegas weekend. But this took the crown. Valara, his stunningly serious, silver-skinned captor, was methodical in her approach. After their first encounter, she had moved on to what she called controlled variable assessments. Zack wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but judging by the way she had strapped down one of his arms while leaving the other free, he had a feeling things were about to get interesting. She stood at a sleek console, adjusting floating holographic symbols Zack couldn't begin to decipher. The rhythmic hum of alien machinery surrounded them, deepening the surreal nature of it all. "We will now assess voluntary resistance and tactile endurance," she announced, as if that explained anything. Zack sighed. "Most people just call that tickling, or teasing, you know." Valara blinked, clearly puzzled. Teasing. Oh, she was serious. Deadly serious. Zack groaned. Never mind. She approached once more, her silver fingers gliding over his forearm. Her touch was cool, a stark contrast to the heat radiating from his own skin. It was light, almost too light, like she was analyzing texture as much as reaction. Zack tensed. "You know, in human culture, we have this thing called personal space." Valara ignored the remark, instead watching closely as she traced the muscle of his arm, following the line up toward his shoulder. "Your epidermis is highly responsive. Your musculature contracts even under minimal contact. That's usually what happens when a gorgeous alien keeps touching me like I'm some kind of pet." She paused, her glowing violet eyes narrowing slightly. "You associate tactile stimulation with pleasure?" Zack let out a dry laugh. "Under the right circumstances? Absolutely." Valara considered this, tilting her head. "Does perceived attractiveness enhance responsiveness?" Zack opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You seriously don't know how attraction works, do you?" She studied him in silence, her gaze so intense that he shifted uncomfortably under it. Then, as if testing a hypothesis, she slowly pressed her fingertips against the center of his chest. Zack inhaled sharply. Her touch wasn't just cold anymore, it was electric. The warmth of his skin seemed to transfer to her, heating her fingertips as they traced downward, pausing just above the waistband of his pants. A slow, deliberate glide, soft but lingering. Zack clenched his jaw. "Holy hell, your heart rate has increased by 17%, Valara murmured, intrigued. "Are you experiencing distress?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that I've been abducted by a sexy, silver-skinned scientist who won't stop feeling me up in the name of science." Valara's lips parted slightly. "You find my methods stimulating?" Zack groaned. "That's not what I said." "Interesting." Before he could react, she leaned in, her breath warm against his collarbone. Then, light as a whisper, her lips brushed against his skin. Zack jolted slightly, a shiver running down his spine. It wasn't a deep kiss, just the barest pressure, a ghost of warmth against his shoulder. But the contrast between her cool touch and heated breath sent a rush of something primal through him. Valara pulled back immediately, her expression thoughtful. Contact with the lips produces an amplified response, she noted. Zack exhaled sharply, trying to regain control. Valara, what exactly are you hoping to learn from this? She straightened, folding her hands behind her back. An understanding of human sensory thresholds. Your species exhibits a strong physiological reaction to specific stimuli. I must determine the biological function. You're trying to science your way through attraction? She frowned slightly. Attraction, a chemical response, yes? Zack huffed a laugh, shaking his head. It's a lot more than that, Valara. She regarded him for a long moment, then reached for the restraint around his wrist. With a quiet click, it unlatched, leaving him unbound for the first time. Zack rubbed his wrist, but didn't make a move to escape. He wasn't sure if that was because he couldn't, or because a part of him didn't want to. Valara stepped back, still watching him. Would you be willing to demonstrate? He blinked. Demonstrate attraction. Yes, I believe first-hand observation may yield the most accurate results. Zack stared at her, waiting for the punchline. But Valara, in all her scientific precision and detached logic, was utterly sincere. He ran a hand down his face. Oh, you have no idea what you're asking for. Her violet eyes glowed with curiosity. Then you must show me. Zack chuckled, low and incredulous. Sweetheart, don't say I didn't warn you. This time, he was the one to initiate contact. His fingers brushed the smooth line of her jaw, testing the silken coolness of her skin. Valara's breath hitched slightly, a barely perceptible reaction, but it was there. Encouraged, Zack traced lower, skimming his thumb over the soft curve of her lower lip. She parted her lips slightly, blinking as if the sensation was entirely foreign to her. Fascinating, she murmured. Zack smirked. Oh, sweetheart, we're just getting started. Zack had always considered himself a man of science, not in the way Valara was, but in the way that he trusted evidence. And right now, the evidence was clear. He was wildly attracted to this silver-skinned alien scientist. She had no idea what she was getting into. He really didn't want to stop. Valara remained still, watching him with those piercing violet eyes, her usually unreadable expression shifting into something softer. Curious, maybe even uncertain. Zack traced the curve of her cheek, marveling at the way her skin seemed to absorb his warmth. You're not used to being touched, are you? She blinked, her lips parting slightly. Physical contact among my species is rare. It is reserved for necessary functions. Zack smirked. Sweetheart, I hate to break it to you, but on Earth, this is a necessary function. Valara tilted her head. Explain. He chuckled. Oh, I'd rather show you. Before she could analyze that response, he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers in the gentlest of kisses. A test, just as she had tested him. But unlike her clinical touch, this was deliberate, coaxing. He felt her sharp inhale against his mouth, the way her body tensed before slowly, hesitantly, melting into his. Her lips were cool at first, but as the kiss deepened, they warmed against his. Her hands, which had once explored him with detached precision, now clutched his shoulders with something more instinctive, more human. A quiet gasp escaped her as Zack's hand traced her waist, pulling her closer. He could feel her heartbeat, if that's what it was, pounding against his chest, out of sync with his own, but just as wild. Valara pulled back slightly, her breath uneven. Your method of data transfer is highly effective. Zack let out a low laugh. Sweetheart, you don't need a lab report to figure that one out. She didn't respond, at least not verbally. Instead, she grabbed him, pulling him into another kiss. This time, there was no hesitation. For the first time since waking on this ship, Zack wasn't thinking about escape, and when Valara's hands traced his skin, not to study but to feel, he knew they had long since left the boundaries of science.